I want to welcome you on behalf of the Contemplative Studies Initiative. My name's Hal Roth, and I'm the director. In contemplative studies, we study human contemplative experience across cultures and across time, from humanistic, scientific, and artistic approaches. We also feature what we call integrative contemplative pedagogy, in which students study contemplative practices from the kind of traditional third person at a distance approach that we find throughout the university, and also a critical first person approach where students actually learn the contemplative practices in the context of their classes. We recently, starting in September, were accepted by the university as a formal undergraduate concentration or major, and students are able to pursue both the sciences track, which involves relevant neuroscience, cognitive science, and psychology, and a humanities track, which is divided into contemplative religious traditions and philosophy of mind, and it's also possible to work out creative arts within that context, within the humanities side. We have a very active series of events coming up this semester. In addition to the workshop tomorrow, we will have, we've got 2 lectures, the Interlandy Lecture Series on April 10th and April 13th, along with a workshop on Taoist practice by Professor Louis Kamyathi of the University of San Diego. We have also a lecture coming up on the 20th on contemplative computing by someone from Google named Linda Stone. And we have Richie Davidson, the world's leading neuroscientist who studies contemplative practice, who will be lecturing on April 29th to end the semester. So if you would like to learn more about contemplative studies and our activities, please go to our website. We have a lot of material on the website, and you can also sign up to be on our listserv. We're also, let me just do an informal poll here. So as you know, if with different concentrations, programs, departments, they have an acronym that's used when you sign up for courses on our course registration system called Banner. So we're actually moving towards getting that established for contemplative studies. So the 2 options so far, so I want to take a poll on this. Let me write it right there.
This is not a scientific poll.
No. So they have to be 4 letters. So the 2 that we've come up with so far are cost and C-stew. So just an informal poll. How many prefer cost? And how many prefer C-stew?
Ooh.
We'll see what we can do. If you have other suggestions, please send them to me in emails. Our speaker this evening, Joseph Goldstein, graduated from Columbia with a Bachelor in Philosophy in 1965 and went into the Peace Corps, part of a generation of young people who were looking to be engaged in making the world a better place. He then ended up spending 7 years in India and Burma, training with some of the leading Vipassana teachers, insight meditation teachers there, including U Pandita, S.N. Goenka, and came back and, along with Sharon Salzberg and Jack Kornfield, established the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts in 1975. Since that time, he's been leading retreats, writing books, I think 7 books to this point. He has a brand new book out entitled, not surprisingly, Mindfulness. A gateway to enlightenment.
Practical guide to awakening.
A practical guide to awakening. And he will be signing copies of the book after the retreat tomorrow at 4:45 outside the Crystal Room in Alumni Hall. The retreat is oversubscribed, and so it's not possible now to attend. But if you would like to come to the book signing, please come to the Crystal Room in Alumni Hall at 4:45. Joseph Goldstein is, without a doubt, one of the real pioneers in bringing Buddhist contemplative practice and practices from Asia to the West. And when the history of the transmission of Buddhism to the West is written, there will be a very large section devoted to the work and teachings of Joseph Goldstein. Please join me in welcoming him.
It felt a little too distant to be behind, so I think I'm going to just sit on the table. Thank you, Hal. Just out of interest, how many of you have done some kind of meditation practice? Perfect. We'll sit for an hour and a half. Be the best talk. Why don't we sit for like 5 minutes or so just to collect oneself. Is there anybody who has not done practice at all? Okay, so I'll just give a little bit of guidance. Sit, comfortably with your back reasonably straight, your feet flat on the floor. So you want to be relaxed, but not too relaxed. And if you're used to sitting with the eyes closed, that's how we usually do it, but one can also sit with the eyes slightly open. You can begin by taking a few deep breaths, just to get into the body, inhabit the body. And then slowly let the breath come to its own natural rhythm. As you're sitting, at first get a sense of the felt sense of the body sitting. Feeling the body posture. Settling into the awareness of the body. And within that framework of the body awareness, you might become aware of the different sounds in the room. Letting the mind become open, spacious. Aware of the sound of my voice, the ambient sounds. Simple, receptive awareness. And within this open spaciousness of mind, you might begin to feel the sensations of the breath, the sensations of the body breathing. You can steady the attention on the feeling of each breath. Relaxed, receptive. Aware of your sitting posture, that felt sense of the body. aware of sounds as they appear and change. Connecting with the feeling of each breath. Notice when the mind gets carried away in a thought or an image. Become aware of thinking and gently reconnect with the body, with the sounds, with breathing. And in a very simple way, just notice the quality of your mind. Is it interested? Is it bored? Is it restless? Is it concentrated? Just to begin to see that we can actually become mindful of our minds. And settling back into the body, into the breath. When you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes, coming back into the room. So welcome. Thank you for coming this evening. I want to thank Al, Professor Roth, for inviting me. It's not often that I have a chance to speak to kind of university communities. And so coming here, it was nice contemplating it because it made me reflect upon my own years in college, university, which is now 50 years ago. And from one perspective, it feels like the Ice Age, you know. And from another, it's like a few breaths. And just that awareness of how quickly time passes. Somebody once commented that at a certain age, breakfast starts happening every 15 minutes. And so some of you laughed, and you know. But there's something important in that, and which I wanted to convey to everyone. It's precisely because, certainly from this perspective of this age, and realizing how quickly it all goes by, it highlights the importance of mindfulness, of how do we live this quickly passing life? Are we living with awareness, with wakefulness, with consciousness? Or are we simply being carried along, in the stream of our conditioning? When I was thinking back to my college years, I realized that in those years there were two questions which were really underlying a lot of my inner life. The questions were, at that point, unarticulated, because we've come a long way, actually. I was not aware of any contemplative studies program at that time. I studied philosophy, and it was not about this. So the questions were there, but there was not much opportunity to explore them. But the two questions that really were driving my life and my interests at that time and since then are pretty universal questions for all of us. And the first one, which really was strong, in those college years, who am I? Who's behind? Sometimes I would look in the mirror, and just try, who is behind that face? Who's behind the whirlwind of emotions and feelings and desires and fears and insecurities? And there was this strong urge to want to find some place of, you could say, authenticity, of just who's behind it all. So this was a driving force, and I think for many of us, it may start in our early years, but this is a question throughout life that we deal with. For me, a way of opening or beginning to answer that question really happened after school when I was in the Peace Corps. I was in Thailand. I actually had applied to go to East Africa, but the universe sent me to Thailand. If I had gone to East Africa, I might be teaching African drumming. But as it turns out, I'm teaching Buddhist meditation. So when I was in Thailand, I started going to these discussion groups for Westerners at one of the famous temples there. That some of the monks were trying to introduce Westerners to Buddhism. And I had just come from my years at Columbia studying philosophy. The first time I went with a copy of Spinoza in hand, and I was going to kind of debate these monks. So I would be going, and I would be asking so many questions in these groups that people actually stopped coming. Yeah, and we've probably all been in groups with people like that. Well, that's how I was. Finally, I think it was out of some desperation, one of the monks said, "Joseph, why don't you try meditating?" And I think it was just a way of getting me to be quiet. Here, I was very young. I was just 21 years old in the Far East. It was all very exotic to me. Just being there, being overseas in this foreign culture, didn't know anything about Buddhism, didn't know anything about meditation. So it's all, exciting. So the monk, he gave me just the very basic instructions, sitting, being with the breath. So I get all my paraphernalia together, and a cushion and mat and this and that. And I sit down and I set my alarm clock for 5 minutes because I didn't want to sit too much. But what's so amazing is that something actually happened in that first 5 minutes. And it wasn't any great enlightenment experience. But what happened, even in that very short time, was that I saw that there was a way to look into the mind as well as looking out through it. Just that, it was like a turning in place. And just that was amazing to me, that there was a methodology for looking inward. So this was revelatory, you know. I was so excited by this that I started inviting my friends over to watch me meditate. They didn't come back. But in a certain way, I'm still doing it. So thank you for coming. So this was really the beginning of understanding a way of addressing that question, who am I? Years after the Peace Corps, then when I went to India to study more formally with a teacher, one of the first things my teacher said, this was in Bodh Gaya in India, which is the place the Buddha was enlightened. And I met my first teacher there, Anagarika Munindraji, and he said something just the very first time I met him, which completely captured my attention. He said, if you want to understand the mind, sit down and observe it. That's it. There was no ritual, there was nothing to join, there was nothing. It was just that very common sense, obvious statement. If we want to understand our minds, sit down and observe them. How else can we understand our minds? We could stand up and observe it, but the intention is that we need to learn, we need to train ourselves how to look inward. And this is the whole teaching on mindfulness. The Buddha laid out in a very systematic way, in a very coherent way, a method, many methods actually, for turning the attention inward. Where we begin to discover just the nature of the body, the nature of thought, the nature of emotion, what it's all about. We really begin to be able to answer that question, who am I? We do find a place of understanding, a place of, we could say authenticity, we could say inner resilience, inner understanding. So this was the move around that first big question, who am I? The second question that came up both in those college years and comes up throughout life, and I think it's one that comes up for all of us, is how can I be happy? How can I be happy in my life? And we get answers, responses to that question from so many different sources. Society is telling us what we should do to be happy, and our parents are telling us, and our friends are telling us, and our peers are telling us, and advertising is telling us, and the internet is telling, do this and you'll be happy, do that and you'll be happy. I came across one advertising, there are many, there are a million examples of this, but a couple that I really like. There's one advertisement that says, instant gratification just got easier. ShopVogue.com. Now, Vogue.com might not be your website of choice, but I'm sure you each have a website that's giving a similar message. Do this and you'll be happy. Get this and you'll be happy. One time I was in New York, just walking down the street, with all the stores, and one store had a window, in the window there was a sign that said, "Don't let desires pass you by." As if we just fulfill all our desires, then we'll be happy. So we're getting messages, all kinds of messages. So the question, I think, for all of us is, how do we find out for ourselves? How do we test this? How do we really see, is this true? Because the messages are coming in. And if we don't have a means for testing, and for seeing for ourselves really what brings about a genuine happiness or not, then our lives are just tossed about. We're doing this and we're doing that and following this suggestion, and we don't have any ballast. We don't have any stability in our lives. Here's where mindfulness plays such a critical role. If we're mindful in our lives, and this isn't just about meditation, this is just bringing awareness, bringing wakefulness to our life experience. We can see for ourselves in our various experiences what does make us happy, what brings about a genuine happiness for us, and what doesn't. This is, I think, of critical importance. And I just want to read one little teaching from the great guru, John Lennon. When I was 5 years old, my mother always told me that happiness was the key to life. When I went to school, they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wrote down happy. They told me I didn't understand the assignment. And I told them they didn't understand life. Really, this is a fundamental question. And you could substitute if the word happiness is not exactly the right word for you. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's freedom, maybe it's love. But the point is, how do we find for ourselves and know for ourselves, yes, this is what brings that about. This is the cause of it. If we have developed, to some extent, the ability to pay attention to what's going on in our lives as it's going on. So we're actually aware, we're mindful, we can begin to learn a lot. So I'll just give a few examples. When you're going through your life, notice how it feels when you're being kind to people. And notice how it feels when you're being unkind. Which makes you happier? Which makes you more peaceful? I mean, that's an easy question. And yet very often, because we're not paying attention to our experience, we get caught up in, our various reactions to situations, and we may find ourselves being unkind and not paying attention to the fact that this is not serving us. It's not making us happy. We justify it for a whole host of reasons, but it really doesn't serve us. Notice what it's like when you approach life and other people from a place of inclusion. Where we're really including others in our field of friendliness. And notice what it's like when we're in a situation where we're excluding, where we're keeping people out. Now, how much of the suffering in the world and in this country is because there's other. You know, we've created a circle and there's an exclusion going on. The Dalai Lama has a wonderful little teaching. He says, I try to be with everyone I meet as an old friend. And he's the Dalai Lama, and so. But just as an attitude, you know, it's that attitude of inclusion, which makes us happier. It's not that it's, you know, this is how we should be. It actually brings about what we desire for ourselves. But we have to see it. You know, we hear this, and we probably hear it a million times. But the transformation happens when we are actually seeing it in our lives. And that comes from being mindful, from paying attention. What's it like when we're in the habit of seeing what's good in other people rather than in emphasizing their faults? You know, for many people, this comes up a lot on meditation retreats. Almost everybody has a strong pattern in the mind of judgment. You know, we have lots of judgments about almost everything and everybody, and not the least ourselves. Self-judgment. But what would it be like just to recalibrate a bit, and instead of emphasizing or looking or highlighting, you know, the faults in people, of which, of course, there are many, what would it be like to actually look for and emphasize and appreciate the good qualities? From the Buddhist perspective, this recalibration is actually the condition for metta, loving kindness, to arise, focusing on the good. So I'll just share one little story with you about this. This was in my early years in India. And in those years, this was like 1967, 68, 69, staying in this place in Bulgaria called the Burmese Vihar. Just very few people there. Just, I don't know, there might have been 10 Westerners there. And we were practicing together. And then one evening decided just to kind of get together in a little social, just in the courtyard of this. It's kind of like a monastery, only there weren't really many monks there. It was more Western travelers were staying there. And this one woman who was part of the group said, so we were gathered around the evening drinking tea and, you know, just talking. And this one woman said that she had written a song about each one of us, you know. And so, of course, you know, I just assumed that it would be a humorous, kind of a little humorous roast, you know, just. It wasn't that at all. What she had done was she had gone around with each person and made this little song about some good quality that she saw in each person. And what was so amazing to me was how surprising that was. You know, it never dawned on me that somebody would do that, because it would always be, you know, just the little roast. So this shift, this is the creativity of the whole meditative process. When we actually are beginning to pay attention to the well-established habit patterns in the mind, we see for ourselves, this does not make me happy. This does not make me peaceful. Can I reorient to something that does? So there's a tremendous empowerment that comes from being mindful. So just one more example. how do we feel when we're being generous? And how do we feel when we're more self-centered? You know, it always feels good, in my experience. You know, whenever I'm being generous in some way, there's always an uplifting feeling. And when I'm just more concerned about me and self-centered, it's a much more contracted feeling. So one practice that I've started to do, this quite a few years ago, I just want to back up 1 minute. One of the things that in reflecting back on my life and seeing kind of the unfolding, there was a time, and this was when I was much younger, even maybe in high school or my first years in college. It's like I needed permission. I actually, how to say this? I needed permission to be generous. You know, I would have this generous impulse, and maybe, you know, it was something that was a little more than just some little thing. And in my mind, I would think, is this the right thing to do? You know, so because I was a poor student and I didn't have much. Should I be doing this? And I remember this whole process of learning that it's okay to be generous. That I had to learn that. It was not sort of built in. Okay, so over the years, I came to appreciate that, and I started doing a practice which I have found extremely powerful and with great good consequences. I've undertaken the practice of, if I have the thought to give something, I do it. I act on it. So that's my practice. You know, the thought may come spontaneously. If I'm aware of the thought to give something, okay, my practice is to actually do it, because it's so easy to have the thought, and you know, it's a nice thought, and the thought comes and goes. Or we have the thought and we second guess ourselves. No, maybe I'll need that, or you know, and so we don't do it. It's been amazing to me because, of course, I think most of us very often have many thoughts, you know, in a moment, both with little things and sometimes with big things. Just to give something, to share something, acting on it has really developed this quality both of letting go and of generosity, and it has major consequences. And it's been very interesting. Sometimes it has been just little things. Sometimes it's been big things. It's like a thought will come, something way out of what would be normal behavior. And sometimes the reaction in my mind is, whoa, am I going to do that? But I've taken it in practice, and so you know, I do it. I have never regretted. I've never regretted any act of generosity. So it's a practice. You know, we're reshaping our minds. We're cultivating those qualities in the mind that not only serve others, but make us happy. It's really... Thich Nhat Hanh is a wonderful teaching. He says, mindfulness is a clever way to enjoy life. Happiness is available. Please help yourselves to it. Do you get a sense, I hope so, that our minds and our hearts and our lives are a dynamic, creative process? It's not that how we are is fixed. It's completely dynamic. And you know, and even in neuroscience now, not that my knowledge of it is very minimal, but just this whole idea of neuroplasticity, that the brain actually can change through what we do. And this is borne out so clearly in meditation and in the application of mindfulness. Okay, so I've just mentioned a few things that really have to do with bringing mindfulness to our lives, and seeing what actions, what behaviors, what attitudes actually make us happy and which don't. There's one other aspect of mindfulness that I want to touch on briefly. And that has to do with the kind of mindfulness that we cultivate in a meditation retreat, which is more focused and more formal and more intensive, where we're really developing a moment-to-moment mindfulness. What I've talked about so far is more the general application of it in our lives, and paying attention to our experience. In a meditation retreat, we're getting very concentrated on the momentary level of phenomena. We're seeing how things are arising and passing. Our whole life, what we call life, is a flow of momentary experience. And of course, we can understand that intellectually, but the transformative power of it is when we're really seeing it. Often we think of the body as being, this is the body, it's relatively solid, it changes over time, but it's pretty fixed in a certain way. In meditation, when the mind gets focused and we're getting very concentrated on the momentary experience, we see the body is not some solid mass at all. We begin to experience the body as an energy field in constant change and flow and transformation. And it's precisely by being with the body on that level that meditation has such a healing aspect. And there are many, many stories of things, of the whole system getting healed through the awareness of this energy field that is the body. We begin to understand the fleeting nature of thoughts. Instead of being so caught up in them and them so dominating our lives, we just see how they come and go. And we begin to see the ephemeral nature of emotions, what we can get so caught up in and so reactive. We just take a very different look at it. And tomorrow in the workshop, we're going to be going through all of these things in a more precise and meditative way. But I just wanted to give a sense of the different level of understanding that can come when we practice meditation, some amount of formal meditation, and are focusing our mind in this very momentary way. A profound truth emerges, and one that really is the key to the Buddha's whole teaching of liberation. As we're meditating on this level and seeing just the momentariness of things arising and passing, our experience of impermanence, our experience of change gets so heightened. We're just seeing everything is arising and passing. It's like a quickly flowing river. This is our life when looked at, in a very concentrated way. So what is the implication of seeing that? There's a tremendous consequence. We begin to see with such clarity that in this flow, in this rapid flow of change, the more we cling to things staying the same way, a certain way, the more we cling, the more we suffer. If we're attached to that which in its nature changes, what's the result? You know, we're holding on to our bodies, staying a certain way. How do we feel when they age or we get sick? You know, we're attached to another person staying a certain way. How do we feel as they go through their own changes? We're attached to certain mindsets. We're attached to certain possessions. Whatever it may be, everything is in this process of change to the degree that we can be with experience without grasping, then we live with ease. But of course, our conditioning, to a large extent, oh, I like that. I like this. I want this. I want that. And we try to fix it. We try to hold it. We try to keep it, contrary to the truth that everything is changing. So seeing this slowly begins to open our hearts, you know, where we can be receptive, we can be open to this flow of experience without the tightness, without the contraction of trying to hold on. So I guess I'll just close by saying we're in an extraordinary time now. And it's, you know, when I think back to the difference of when I was in college and now, the awareness of all this now and the programs in different schools, and I don't know how many of you saw the announcement, the poster for this talk, but in it I quoted, mindfulness now is being taught in schools, you know, even in grade schools. So a friend was doing a mindfulness program for second graders. It was a 6-week program, and I didn't exactly, you know, but in class they taught some fundamentals. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, they asked these, you know, little kids, these second graders, for feedback. I should have brought the whole sheet, I didn't, but one said, oh, it helps me go to sleep at night, or it helps me get better grades, or it helps me, you know, not get so angry. But my very favorite, from a second grader, he said, mindfulness is the best thing that ever happened in my life. In his long life. So, I mean, it is really great that somehow it's entering in more to the mainstream at whatever level, you know. So there's this whole movement called secular mindfulness, which is just, you know, helping us to be happier in our lives, seeing what brings happiness. And my hope is that as it spreads, you know, and brings great benefit to so many people, that we also don't lose the depth of what it can bring. You know, so the Buddha really taught this as a path to liberation, as a path to freedom, as a path to awakening. So it can serve all of these ends. I think that's all I have to say for now. If we have time for some questions or discussion or comments.
I listened to your speech on what is mindfulness and what is it not. And it's sort of the last bit of what you just got to. And it was interesting because I had taken a MSPR class, not knowing anything, never having done any work, just knowing that I really thought maybe the idea of being mindful, slowing down would be a good if I wanted to change. And I went all through that class without ever hearing Buddha or why this was going to actually help serve other ends. And I thought your speech on sort of the roots of this and how it can really change in terms of the Buddha-inspired teaching. It was completely absent from my experience with mindfulness, and it just brought it together.
Yeah.
So that message, I think, is really important. Because you can read and experience a lot of mindfulness stuff and never know it's connected.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I named my last book Mindfulness. I wanted to reclaim the word. The whole book it's a big book. It's like over 400 pages. But what it is it's a quite a detailed, but very experientially based explanation of the Buddha's discourse on mindfulness. So it really brings it back to its classical roots, you know. And some of you may know this, some of you may not, but you know, John Kabat-Zinn, who started MBSR, he has a deep background in Buddhism. He had the idea for MBSR on a retreat at the Insight Meditation Society. So he was sitting at, this was a productive mind wandering. Yeah. No, it is. I think it is important because the general application of it is very helpful, and there's much more. Yeah.
I'm curious about needing permission to be generous. I kind of feel that way too, but when I'm married and we have a joint bank account, you know, and I don't know, and then I wonder about my motives for being generous, that there could be some dark aspect to it.
Yeah.
Can you clarify what it was that was your question about your needing permission to be generous?
Okay, could you hear that in the back? Good acoustics in this room. There's a lot in that question. It's very interesting. There's so many aspects, like motivation, and so I'll just touch on a few different things. So that sense of needing permission, I think, was there because I was quite young at the time, and maybe. So the specific example that just the memory that comes to mind. So I think I was a freshman in college, and again, I had very little money, but I had met this friend who was, I forget whether he was an exchange student or someone from Pakistan, and I forget the details of what was going on, but he needed a few $100s. Well, at that time, I mean, a few $100, that was a lot. The impulse was to give. But is this the right thing to do? Should I be doing this? And fortunately, it's like, so I seem to recall talking over with my mother, and she was a very generous person. And so she was encouraging of it. So that was like a turning point. That was like, oh yeah, it's okay. So that's kind of what I meant. You may need that permission from your wife. But the whole question of motivation is very interesting because sometimes there are mixed motives. So I'll just, one other little story. This is when I was in India. Sometimes the motives are really hidden. We don't even know. So for those of you who've been to India, there are a lot of beggars. Well, this is just part of the reality, and people, in one way or another, learn some way of relating. So I was in the local bazaar buying some fruit, and there was this little beggar boy. His hand was out, and just without thinking, I took one of the oranges that I just bought and gave it to him. So it was no big deal. It was not. But then something very interesting happened. So I gave him the orange, and he just walked away without the slightest acknowledgement. Not a smile, not a nod, nothing. And it's not that I was expecting effusive thanks for an orange, but when he walked away with no response, I could see, it revealed to me oh yeah, there was a little expectation there of something, just some acknowledgement. So that was interesting. So one of the things in our journey, which has to do not only with being generous, but when we look at our motives for lots of things, very few of us are saints. Any saints? Maybe, you never know who's sitting in the audience. But so for almost all of us, our motives very often will be mixed. We'll see the wholesome part and the unwholesome part. So instead of having that be a deterrent, it's just to acknowledge, oh yeah, there's that. But the initial impulse was wholesome, was generous. I can act on that. Because if we wait until we're completely pure, it'll be at least till tomorrow. So there's a line from W.H. Auden, which kind of expresses this. I love this from one of his poems. He said, "Love your crooked neighbor with all your crooked heart." So it's just that acknowledgement, yeah, we're all a mix. And this is just another point of mindfulness, a critical point. As we look inward and as we see all these different parts of ourselves, we see a lot that's not so great. In the practice of mindfulness, we really learn to see that without self-judgment, without self-blame, without guilt, because it's much better to see it than not see it, right? And in the seeing of it, we no longer need to get caught or so identified with it, but we need to see it. We need to open to all the parts of ourselves.
When you, I was thinking of guilt, you said guilt. Oftentimes I find myself giving out guilt. Do you ever, does that figure into your vow?
So the question was, sometimes in giving, she feels that she's giving out of guilt. How does that fit into my resolve? It would be interesting for you to see if guilt is the only motive. Because I'll bet it isn't. There may be some of that. But it would be really interesting for you to kind of unpack and see, okay, the guilt is there, but is there also some goodwill that you want to give because you want to help? If you can see that, oh yeah, there's that part too, then you can give, even though the guilt is there, but you can be emphasized, oh, I'll give, knowing that there's this genuine wish to help. So again, it's not a question that we have to wait until we're totally purified to do anything. Otherwise, we wouldn't do anything. Yeah. And so when I have a thought to give, and guilt it's not one of my big trips, but now that practice is, if the thought comes, do it. And I just, truth in advertising, it's not perfect, but it's pretty strong, and I've cultivated it. I had this somebody had given me this beautiful wooden Buddha, carved Buddha image. I don't know, a couple 100 years old, and it was really beautiful. I had it for years. And then one of the staff people at the center, they just had a baby. And I'm sitting, in fact, I was looking at this image that I really liked. And that thought came, oh, yes. And that was one of those moments, oops, I really like this. But the power of having taken it on as a practice overrode kind of my clinging, you know. So I just, you know, and I gave it, and of course they loved it. It felt great to be able to do it, and there was not 3 seconds of missing it. I mean, this is one of the great things that we think that, you know, we need all these things, and these are the things that are making us happy. And then you give them, it's like the first time I was in India practicing, and the very first, I was practicing as a lay person, but I decided to shave my head. It was kind of a training for what happened naturally many years later. But at that time I had a lot of hair. And I remember it was such a big thing. You know, I was thinking about it, and should I do it? And this is, you know, and this is a huge thing. And finally I do it, you know, and it's like 5 seconds after it's done, it didn't mean anything. So it's just very interesting to see how much we invest in things that don't in any way whatsoever really contribute to our happiness. You know, because the happiness or the peace or the love has to do with the quality of our minds. It's not what we have. You know? So this is a big lesson.
It's nice to hear you again. I've heard you so many times over the last 30 years in Boston. I've been meditating for on and off over 40 years, and sometimes I feel like it's really difficult, and I don't know how much I'm getting from it. I go through periods that I fall asleep because of my life, you know, sometimes I don't get around to meditating until later on. And I don't know quite how to deal sometimes with that idea of, you know, I'm invested in my practice, but I don't feel like I know sometimes what I'm doing, or I'm getting enough out of it, or, you know, that kind of thing.
I sometimes feel exactly the same way. I just finished a 2-month retreat myself. And mostly I've been practicing a long time like you, and so mostly there's this kind of a strong momentum, you know, but every once in a while there's a sitting, and it's as if I never sat before. Yeah, and the mind is doing whatever it's doing, and the body hurts, and I'm restless, and I get it from that sitting. You've been practicing for all these years. But what I learned from all these years of practice is that that's just part of it. And not to buy into those doubting thoughts. That there will be times. Practice is not linear. It's not like it just gets better and better and better and better. It's a curve, you know, it's like sine curve? The slope of the curve is going up, but from day to day, from sitting to sitting, it may be really clear, it may be really difficult. The important thing is just the perseverance through the ups and downs. So, I mean, really what you're asking about, and this is, it's like every question can be an hour Dharma talk. You know, it really has to do with the hindrance of doubt. You know, we have some experience, and it causes doubt to arise in the mind. the seduction of doubt, the reason it's so powerful and the reason the Buddha highlighted it as something to really watch out for is because doubt comes masquerading as wisdom. You know, it's like you have those kind of sitting, and then there's this very wise-sounding voice in the mind. Oh, you know, what's the point? I've been doing this for so many years, and I'm not getting any place, and maybe I should go shopping. Whatever. So it sounds wise, you know. And so we think it's the voice of wisdom, and the challenge. And I think from the way you described it, I think you already know this, that it's not wisdom, that it's just the doubting mind. You know, and if you see it as that, you see that comes and goes, and then you just continue with your practice and the unfolding. It's really very simple. There's a basic choice. And it's a choice moment to moment and day to day. Do we want to be aware or not aware? Do we want to be wakeful or asleep? That's it. You know, and if we have seen that, yes, wakefulness brings about a vitality and understanding and a wisdom and more compassion, then even as we go through the ups and downs, we stay committed to the path of practicing wakefulness. You know, and so the choice, there's no choice. I want to be more hateful. There, let me be really stingy. You know, once we wake up to a certain extent about our lives and our minds and the potential for change, it's like the Dharma hook is in. You know, and it's not easy. It's not an easy path. But my teacher Munindraji used to say, it's simple but not easy. So it's not complicated, but it takes practice. So keep going.
You know that your description of that first moment of meditation that you had? I was wondering if you could tell us how that really, or that moment and what you saw in that moment developed, and at this point, how that same first moment that you had when meditating, how you would reflect on that now, and maybe what that was leading to.
Well, that first moment really was understanding that there was a method to looking in. So it's not just sitting down, closing your eyes, and then wondering, well, what do I do now? You know, and this is the beauty of the teachings, that there's a very clear methodology for practice, you know, and set of instructions. And, you know, over thousands of years, untold numbers of people have actually practiced and gone inward. And so it was seeing that there was a way, and then over the years, in studying with different teachers, learning more about the methodology, you know, and the more subtleties, and then continuing the practice. So then when I sit now, it's, you know, employing the fruit of all those years. Oh, this is what you do. Yeah. And it does get in a certain way, it does get easier. It's like learning anything. You learn a musical instrument or a sport. You know, when we first start, it's awkward, and so we don't quite know what we're doing. But as it's practiced, one develops a certain facility, and so it becomes much more easeful in that regard. Yeah. Fleet.
I wonder if you could say something about this path and bravery. You know, the moments of letting go and spaciousness and all that's wonderful, and then there's also actually having to look at some of our stuckness and our suffering. And I think any of us may be sitting on a lot of pain. And then also with the mainstream of mindfulness, we're bringing mindfulness to some of our fellow citizens who are really suffering with a lot of trauma, and their impulse is not necessarily want to move closer to it. But I just wonder if you could say something about the bravery involved.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And this is one of those questions. So in the Buddhist teachings, one frame for the teachings are called the 7 factors of awakening, the 7 factors of enlightenment, where the Buddha highlights, okay, these are the 7 qualities of mind that are needed to become fully awake, like mindfulness, like investigation, like concentration. Okay, one of the key factors of awakening is usually translated as energy. The Pali word, the Sanskrit, is virya. Like it takes energy. It takes a certain effort. It doesn't just happen by itself. When I was exploring the meaning of that word virya, one of the things that emerged was one of the meanings is courage. You know, it's like that, and courage, that comes from the Latin. It's like strength of heart. You know, it's like we strengthen our heart to be with difficulties. And this quality of courage or energy can be developed. It's not that we necessarily start with a huge amount, you know, but the practice, if it's guided well, can help people slowly strengthen that quality of the heart. And so just a simple example. When I first started practicing, there was just so much pain. I couldn't sit cross-legged at all. I mean, you know, in 5 minutes, there was just too much pain. I couldn't deal with it. So I sat in a chair and, you know, I found my way. What's interesting, and I've seen this with countless meditators, at first, even a little bit of pain, you know, people recoil from it. But slowly, and it has to be done in a very gradual way, people are reminded, oh, it's okay to feel the pain. It's okay to feel the unpleasantness. It's okay to feel difficult emotions. We need to be reminded that, because as you say, the initial reaction is, I don't want to be with that. So just another example. So the most difficult emotion that I've worked with in my years of practice, you know, we all have our own stuff. But for me, the deepest afflictive emotion was fear. Huge amount of fear. And it wasn't even fear about anything specifically. It was just, there was a time in my practice when I was afraid to go from sitting to standing. You know, it's completely irrational. But it was just like the primal emotion. And so I would be working with this a lot. You know, I'd be looking at it and feeling it and noting it and fear. This was over years. You know, this was deep conditioning. Finally, I was doing on one retreat, I want to sidebar here. This is the story that I told Hal. There was a story that if I could work it in, I'd put it in. But it's a fear story. So I was on this sesshin with Sasaki Roshi. He was a very fierce Zen master, and you know the whole Zen thing is very formal and very winds you up. You know, and he's so fierce, and you have to see him 4 times a day, you know, answering the koans. And so I was a wreck. You know, and I'd go in with the answer to my koan, and basically, just do my bow and say my thing. And he'd ring his bell, oh, very stupid. You know, and that was it. And this was going on day after day. So I was getting more and more uptight. So finally, I go in, and he sees what's happening. He gives me an easier koan. He says, how do you manifest Buddha nature while chanting a sutra? You know, we had been doing chanting, you know, every day. Okay, so I understood that. Come in and just chant, you know, a little bit. Well, I don't think he knew, but this triggered something in me that went back to my 3rd grade music teacher who said, Joseph, just mouth the words. So singing has always been, yeah, especially in public, especially before the Zen master. So I was in a state. You know, I was practicing chanting a few lines, you know, in the meditation, practicing. The bell rings to go for an interview. Go in, do my bows, start to chant. I make a total mess of it. You know, I get the words all wrong, and I get the melody all wrong. And I'm feeling totally just exposed and raw and awful. And he just looked at me, and he said, oh, very good. And it was an amazing moment. I mean, I could almost, tears come just thinking about it now, because it was such a lesson in that state of vulnerability. We are also wide open to being touched by love or by compassion. Those words went so deep in me. You know, if I had been just kind of in a normal state and he said, oh, very good, it wouldn't have meant anything. But, so this is the little sidebar that even these difficult emotions, if we are inhabiting them and there's some skillful interaction, they can be hugely powerful, you know, and transformative. Now, just going back to my... So I've been working with fear for so long, and then I was doing walking meditation, working with the fear, and just in the middle of that walking, something shifted in my mind and my attitude. And that shift was expressed in the statement, internally, if this fear is here for the rest of my life, it's okay. And that moment, in all of those years, was the first moment that I had genuinely accepted it. You know, I had recognized it, I had noted it, I had tried to be with it, but it was always to get rid of it. That's not mindfulness. I thought I was being mindful, but so it's only when I could finally drop it, okay, it's okay to feel this. If it's here for the rest of my life, it's okay. And what was so amazing, in that moment of acceptance, that whole glob of fear washed through. It was amazing. And it doesn't mean that that doesn't come up again, but it no longer has that hold. Now I say, oh yeah, it's okay to feel it. And so it comes, it goes like any other emotion. So there are ways, it does take courage, and it takes acceptance, and it takes good guidance. You know, when people are working with these very strong, primal, difficult emotions, yeah, there has to be a lot of care.
Which brings up the issue what you're trying to work and you have no God. You're working entirely alone and you're dealing with some very, very horrendous stuff. How do you do that?
Well, it is more difficult. There are just a couple of suggestions come to mind, but it might take a longer conversation. One is to actually see there are so many avenues for connection now with different teachers, whether it's online or phone or I don't know where you live, but to actually be a little more proactive in seeing if you can find somebody, so that could be something to do, and it may be possible. The other is there are thousands, many thousands of Dharma talks online. And many of them deal with all of these issues, And so another way would just be to, go to some of those sites that have all these Dharma talks and look at maybe it's fear, maybe it's grief, maybe it's rage, maybe it's whatever, whatever, and see if you can find teachings that address it, because a lot can be conveyed that way as well. Just as a simple example, and just talking about fear. For the IMS, for the Vipassana scene, there's a website, Dharma Seed. It has thousands and thousands of talks with so many different teachers, and often all of these things are being addressed. So that might be a help also. Okay, maybe just a couple more.
What advice might you have for people who are interested in researching sort of the science behind meditation and sort of pulling out pieces of mindfulness that could be helpful to sort of underserved or sensitive populations?
I'm not making completely the connection between the two, between the science of it and the offering it to underserved populations.
Right. So, personally, I'm interested in kind of seeing how you can use mindfulness practices to help moms at risk that can kind of in turn help their children. So, what advice you might have?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. So the question was how to find resources to help share the mindfulness and teach mindfulness to certain populations like moms at risk or underserved populations that could benefit a lot but may not have access. There is a lot. There are many people doing that work. And it would be interesting to consult Ms. Google. It would be interesting to consult Ms. Google. I am amazed what's on there. I have sometimes typed in the most esoteric Buddhist texts from Burma that in a million years, there it is. So it might be interesting just to begin to explore that way. Are you familiar with Garrison Institute?
Yeah.
This Garrison Institute is a place in New York State, just about an hour north of New York. It's a retreat kind of conference and a beautiful place. They run lots of different programs. It's not a meditation center. They run lots of different programs. Many of the programs that you might be interested in. So you might look there. And then ask them for further, yeah. But there's a lot happening, so I'd encourage you to kind of go out and explore. Okay, let's just sit. Huh? I wanted to sit for 2 minutes. How about just to let it all go, forget everything. May all beings be at peace. Thank you.